It is 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Holding on in a sea of supports, the parents of the student victims of the Nottingham attacks.
Can't even comprehend how I'm going to deal with it.
Look after your friends and look after people around you.
Grace Somali Kumar, Barnaby Webber and school caretaker Ian Coates were killed as police work flat out to establish what happened. The suspect, thought to be seen here trying to break into a hostel after the students had already been stabbed. Also tonight, risking all to reach Europe. We report from Greece as this migrant boat capsizes, killing at least 79. Hot, dry and dangerous. We see the firefighters trying to put out wildfires with much of the country now at high risk. There are those who applaud and those who detest. The eulogy to Italy's controversial former leader Silvio Berlusconi laid to rest. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. It was a journey no parent would ever want to make, travelling to their child's university, not to collect them for the summer, but to join a vigil to remember them. Barnaby Webber and Grace Somali Kumar had loved being at Nottingham, their parents said. The family of the third victim, Ian Coates, who was just 4 months from retirement, said he was everyone's friend and always willing to help. In a moment, we'll see CCTV, which appears to show the suspect trying to force his way into a residential home. But first, our national correspondent, Tom Parmenter, reports.
At the heart of this vast, emotional gathering, there were families who were in all of their thoughts. The mothers of Barnaby and Grace met here in the place where their children learned and lived. It was a day to hold each other tight. The two students were both 19 years old, their lives filled with energy and opportunities. But everything stopped early on Tuesday morning when they were stabbed to death as they made their way home after a night out in Nottingham. Their fathers wanted to speak to the thousands standing silently on campus.
I've lost my baby boy and I can't even comprehend how I'm going to deal with it. Myself and Emma and Charlie and all his family and friends. Well, I know Barney would be super touched by everyone that's here, and he loved it. He loved it here. He couldn't wait to come back.
The love that we have out here, I just wish we had it everywhere. So look after each other. That's the big thing, is that look after your friends and look after people around you.
Relatives of the third victim of the attacks were also here at the vigil. Ian Coates was a school caretaker, a devoted granddad who was soon due to retire. Another innocent victim. They laid hundreds of single stems. Family, teammates, friends, and university staff.
What should have been one of the biggest celebrations for the student body has turned into one of our darkest days. Barney and Grace are a monumental loss. They were both first years with ambitions, potential, and dreams. What was taken from us yesterday will never be given back, and the shockwaves echo through our student community.
Grace had represented England at hockey for the under-16 and under-18 age groups. She was a huge talent, and she was a medical student who volunteered to give people vaccines during the pandemic. Barnaby, from Taunton in Somerset, was also excelling at sport and his history studies. His university cricket team, just one of the many places where he felt right at home.
Just a great bloke. He threw himself into everything. Every social he was there, every training session, every match, supporting, playing, he was always there. It was amazing.
Grace was incredibly well known as well.
She was incredibly well known. She was, I have many mutual friends in the hockey club and around, and no one can speak highly enough of her as well.
There is just no explanation yet as to why all this has happened, why these families have been thrust into such unbearable pain. But they had enormous support here today, and they will need to draw on that in the days ahead.
The families had travelled many hours to be here, but right now, in this shared moment of grief, they didn't want to be anywhere else. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Nottingham.
Well, the Home Secretary said today that police are keeping an open mind over the attacks and they're still working with anti-terror police. CCTV appears to show the suspect after Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar were stabbed, as our crime correspondent Martin Brunt now reports.
This was the suspect trying to break into a charity hostel and being shoved away. An hour earlier, 2 students had been stabbed to death. Minutes later, a third victim had also been stabbed, his van stolen and 3 pedestrians mowed down. A charity trustee said residents had a lucky escape.
An event like this can definitely turn people's feelings up, especially when they're already kind of vulnerable, people that are housed here. So.
Yeah, and was anyone harmed or anything?
There was no one harmed, from our residents, I can confirm that.
But shaken?
Yes, emotionally people are not 100%.
The suspect, a 31-year-old man, was still being questioned as the investigation continued. Here, police finishing a search of what's thought to be the suspect's former home. In a newly released, more detailed timeline, police said they were called at 4:04 on Tuesday morning. They found students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar unresponsive in Ilkeston Road. The man, matching the suspect's description, was then seen trying to get into the hostel in Mapperley Road. The suspect is then thought to have stabbed Ian Coates on Magdala Road and stolen his van. Within minutes, the van was used to run down 3 people on Milton Street. A man is critical in hospital. The other 2 have minor injuries. Soon after, police say the suspect abandoned the van and confronted officers with a knife. He was tasered and arrested.
They are currently keeping an open mind as to the motives behind these attacks, but I can confirm Nottinghamshire police are being assisted in their inquiries by counter-terror police, though this does not mean that it is currently being treated as a terrorist attack.
On the road where the students died, the crime scene investigation was over as police began a clean-up. We now know that Grace ran from her attacker into the front garden of this house and tried to get help. But nobody was home that night, and Grace died on the doorstep. The woman who lives here told us she was heartbroken. Maybe, she said, we could have saved her. Police have until Saturday morning to question their suspect before they must charge or release him. Martin Brunt, Sky News, Nottingham.
Now, there are fears tonight of a major tragedy in the Mediterranean after a fishing boat packed with migrants capsized. At least 79 people are known to have died, but many, many more are missing. Well, Greek authorities say the sinking happened early this morning, about 46 miles southwest of Greece. The survivors and the recovered bodies have been taken by ship to the port of Kalamata. Well, Alistair Bunkle is in southern Greece for us tonight and joins us now. Alistair?
Well, we believe that this ship left the Libyan port of Tobruk. Now, on Tuesday, it was approached by a number of vessels asking whether it needed any help or assistance. They declined and said that they were en route to Italy, and that is where they wanted to get to. And then at around 2 a.m. on Wednesday morning, the early hours of this morning, it reported engine failure. A Greek Coast Guard vessel nearby said it swerved to the right, to the left, and then sharply again to the right before it capsized, throwing people overboard and almost certainly dragging others down with it.
The survivors that were found were winched to safety in a massive rescue operation in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. The dead were from Egypt, Syria, Palestine and Pakistan. They'd gone to Libya first and then tried to make it into Europe.
We collected 104 people that are here at the harbour at Kalamata in safe places. Doctors and nurses have come from the hospital to examine the immigrants. 21 of them were taken to hospital for intensive care, plus 4 more that from the first moment were taken to the hospital by helicopter because they were more heavily injured.
The rescued have been taken to mainland Greece. They're being looked after by aid agencies. The injured have been taken to hospital. Some are suffering from hypothermia.
We are here offering first aid and psychological support to those people who have suffered a very heavy blow, both physical and mental.
They appeared distressed. Who wouldn't be distressed after a shipwreck? We hope more survivors will be found from this shipwreck.
It's not known how many were on board, but judging by pictures, there could have been hundreds, many of them below deck and out of sight. Greek Coast Guard ships, a Navy frigate, helicopters and a military plane are all searching the area for more survivors and possibly more bodies. The search will continue overnight, but the ship sank in one of the deepest parts of the Mediterranean, making any recovery that much harder. The United Nations says that the route between North Africa and Italy is the most dangerous migrant crossing in the world. 17,000 people have died over the past decade. Sky News recently witnessed hundreds being rescued trying to cross into Europe. The weather is good now, the sea's generally calmer, and so smugglers are taking advantage and more people are trying to make the crossing whilst they can. This is already a major disaster and the death toll is likely to rise further.
Well, the rescue operation is continuing tonight. That is unusual. They will normally stop at sundown, but they know that there are potentially hundreds of people either to recover alive or perhaps more bodies in the sea. I've covered many of these disasters, too many, quite frankly, and often you find that people on board are unable to swim or there are just too few life jackets to go around. So I think the expectation is that the death toll could rise and could rise quite considerably, particularly when you consider those photographs you saw in my report of just how many people were crammed onto that vessel. And the interim Greek government has announced a 3-day period of mourning. Again, that is unusual for a migrant disaster, but again, I think it probably shows the scale of what has happened and the expectation of how much worse it could be.
Alistair, for now, thank you. Now, the report into whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament over parties in Number 10 will be released tomorrow morning. But tonight, the former Prime Minister's war against the committee seems to have gone into overdrive. He's called for one of its members, the Brexit-supporting Conservative grandee Sir Bernard Jenkins, to resign. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, is in Westminster for us tonight. Good evening, Sam. So Boris Johnson's remaining the story again for another day at least.
That's right. Tonight, the former Prime Minister has launched an exocet against a Tory committee member of the Privileges Committee, Sir Bernard Jenkins, which the Guido Fawkes website has accused of attending a lockdown-breaking party himself in December 2020. Now, Boris Johnson calls this monstrous hypocrisy and says that Bernard Jenkins really should have stood down at the start of this inquiry. That's the row of the evening. But to what end? Because tomorrow morning at 9 a.m, the Privileges Committee will release a 30,000-word report into whether or not Boris Johnson deliberately misled Parliament. And we already know much of what's going to come tomorrow. We know that it will found that he did do that because Boris Johnson has told us as such. Nor are there any really sanctions that MPs can levy against Boris Johnson because he has already stood down as an MP. Why tomorrow really matters is because it will show us where the Conservative Party is. Are there defenders of Boris Johnson in the chamber, or do they sit on their hands and let the report go through without comment? Does Boris Johnson remain an itch that present and future Tory MPs feel the need to scratch when times get tough? We'll get a sense of whether that's the case tomorrow.
We certainly will. Sam, for now, thank you. Well, there is a big difference between a pay demand of 35% and a pay offer of 5%. And there's no sign of it being bridged as junior doctors stage their latest 3-day strike. Patients are, as ever, bearing the brunt, and our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi, has spoken to one of them.
You OK? Careful. Right, one. OK.
Hilary is in absolute agony.
1 stones.
She's been waiting for a hip replacement since the start of the pandemic and was finally due to have one 2 days ago. But it was cancelled because of the doctor's strike.
Lovely.
You're obviously in agony. How difficult is it for you to manage day to day?
I'm constantly in pain. I can't sleep at night, so I have to have a chair next to the bed. I can't walk to the pillar box to post a letter, and I can't go shopping. I can't meet friends for lunch. I can't do my job. I'm in pain. Pain brings you frustration.
The latest 3-day strike by junior doctors will bring huge disruption to NHS services. They insist this action is needed to make the government listen to their demands.
35% it would be to restore our pay back to net zero. If it's too much to ask for, it's too much for us to lose. Doctors have seen a huge pay cut over the last 15 years. We're not asking for all that money back in one go. We're being very reasonable in saying that we're willing to work with the government in creative ways to get back to net zero.
The government, though, says the doctors are asking for too much. It claims it is prepared to negotiate, but only if they call off the strikes first.
We moved in terms of the government's position in line with the offer that was accepted by the NHS Staff Council and by trade unions representing a number of other health workers, and made an offer in line with that. But unfortunately, the junior doctors have refused to move from their demand for 35%. They're still insisting on an increase of 35%.
Industrial action this year has already forced the cancellation of 500,000 appointments. But it's not just operations. These strikes put pressure on every part of the hospital.
We've been seeing an increase in activity, unprecedented actually, over the last few days. And with the industrial action that's happening this week as well, we're going to have a high attendance figures, which will lead to longer waits.
Hilary has been told she will have her operation in July, but she's afraid it might take longer unless this bitter dispute is resolved. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Essex.
Now, one of the factors putting pressure on the NHS this week is the prolonged hot spell. But it's not the only emergency service that's on alert. The risk of wildfires across much of Britain is high, according to the Met Office. And our science correspondent, Thomas Moore, saw how firefighters are tackling one in South Wales today.
It's still early summer, but already the wildfires are burning. This is Regos Mountain in South Wales. The flames are proving so hard to extinguish, they're having to fight fire with fire. Specialist teams burn off the vegetation to create a fire break, a tactic more common in the fire hotspots of California, now needed in the UK as the climate changes.
Because of the weather conditions, it doesn't matter how much water we put in this fire, it will dry out and it will reignite. So our only method here is to go along, control burning.
According to the Met Office, much of England and parts of Wales are now at very high risk of wildfires. While in Scotland, firefighters continue to battle a fire near Inverness. North and south, the heat wave and lack of rain have dried out the landscape.
It is very early in the summer, and last year when we had the fires in London, it went to, I believe, extreme, but that was a lot later in the year. How this year will build now is quite worrying.
The wildfire in Wellington, East London, which destroyed several houses, is driving the tactical rethink. Drought provides fires with so much fuel, they spread fast and they're more intense. This shows how difficult it is to extinguish wildfires of this size now in the UK. The vegetation, much of it has gone, but there's enough left for the flames still to burn. Although the firefighters have now moved on following the fire front, they'll come back and deal with these later. The Met Office predicts UK summers will get hotter and drier in the decades ahead. and firefighters are braced for what's to come. Thomas Moore, Sky News in South Wales.
Now, there is little sign of relief in sight for millions of mortgage holders, with interest rates predicted to keep on rising. And that could also impact economic growth. The UK grew a little richer in April, with GDP up 0.2%. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, looks at what happens next.
So we just got the latest data on the UK economy, the state of the economy, GDP. Here it is. This is showing you the big picture of gross domestic product, the size of the economy. It's the level here. You can see the pandemic there, that big fall. And the latest numbers show it's 0.2% growth in April. But the thing I want you to focus on is basically that line. We're kind of back at pre-pandemic levels just about. But essentially, we're flatlining. And most economists think it's going to carry on that way, not necessarily shrinking. But if there is even a slight deviation, we could well be in recession. And the reason that matters is, well, look at what's happening in the mortgage market right now. Now, these are the average rates that people are paying if you're refixing your mortgage. 5.54%. This chart goes all the way back to the 1960s, you can see there. A bit higher for two-year rate mortgages. And it doesn't look like it's very high, does it? That line over there. But highest since 2008. But here's the thing. You've got to adjust for the fact, these are just the headline mortgage rates. Adjust for the fact that you have higher mortgages right now. People are more indebted. They have lower incomes in comparison with their mortgages. Adjust for all of that. And it's a very different picture. You get a very different line, an effective rate, really showing the burden that people are facing, going all the way back to the 1960s. And have a look. Where we are right now is actually the highest since 1991. And remember, 1991, official rates were up at 13%. That precipitated a housing crash, a recession. Well, we're kind of getting up towards those levels right now, and we might get there. We might even exceed it. Why? Well, have a look at what's happened to interest rate expectations. So this is future interest rate expectations for the Bank of England. They've gone up an awful lot because inflation has been a lot higher than expected, a lot higher than the bank expected. By the way, they've just announced they're going to do an external review of their inflation forecasting in the face of criticism. This is what was expected only last month. So rates were going to peak around 4.75% in the next few years. Just look at how that's changed. Now the expectation is they're going up to 5.75%, so closing in on 6%. By the end of the year, the turn of next year. That is really high, and that's yet to feed through to those mortgage charts I showed you a moment ago. So things could get really tough for you, particularly if you have a mortgage.
Now, unlike in the UK, in America, there was a pause in interest rate rises this evening. The US Federal Reserve has kept its key rate unchanged to end a run of 10 consecutive jumps. The rate remains between 5 and 5.25%, their highest level since 2007, but inflation in the US has dropped to 4%, less than half the current level in the UK. The boss of ITV has admitted she is deeply disappointed by allegations of a toxic culture this morning following the departure of Philip Schofield. Dame Carolyn McCall and the ITV Managing Director Kevin Lygo faced questions from MPs on the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, but denied Schofield's affair with a younger male colleague was an open secret at the broadcaster. The King and Queen have hosted a reception at Buckingham Palace to mark the 75th anniversary of the arrival in the UK of the Empire Windrush, the ship that brought the first of hundreds of thousands of Caribbean migrants to help rebuild Britain after the Second World War. To mark the occasion, their Majesties unveiled 10 portraits of people who arrived on those early voyages. And you can learn more about the Windrush generation in a special Sky documentary marking the anniversary. Windrush and Us will air on Sky Documentaries on Tuesday at 8 and on Sky News next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Now, it was an unusual sentiment to hear at a funeral, an admission that there were those who applauded the man at the centre of it and those who detested him. But that was the message as Italy's former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi was laid to rest. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi reports now from Milan.
Waving flags, they turned out in their thousands to say goodbye to a man who was never far from scandal. As the coffin made its way into the cathedral, there was applause. And in his speech, the Archbishop of Milan paid tribute to Silvio Berlusconi's passion for life.
At this moment of leave-taking and prayer, what can we say of Silvio Berlusconi? That he was a man with a yearning for life and love and a desire for joy.
Outside on huge screens, his supporters watched the service. For them, this was a chance to celebrate a leader who dominated politics and public life for decades.
He was a great politician. Berlusconi was everything.
It's someone that really gave a lot to Italy, and I'm really proud.
With his perma-tanned smile, Berlusconi was for the world the face for many years of Italian politics. He was a four-time prime minister, but controversy was never far away.
Silvio Berlusconi was a polarising and divisive figure. As Prime Minister, he was embroiled in numerous legal cases. Many people thought he brought shame upon the country. But in death, he has been elevated. Now it appears a towering figure of the Italian establishment, honoured with a national day of mourning and a state funeral.
And even in death, he is causing discord. Many Italians asking why such a notorious man should be treated with such reverence.
He is a person that, in order to make money and achieve success, ignored rights, people, happiness and our future.
What is not in question is that, for better or worse, Silvio Berlusconi was without doubt one of Italy's most influential politicians. His legacy is likely to be debated for years to come. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Milan.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview, including this on the front page of the Daily Mail on the Nottingham attacks, which shows what it calls two fathers lost in grief. Well, tonight we're joined by the associate editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and the deputy comment editor at the Telegraph, Annabelle. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The families of 2 university students killed in an attack in Nottingham have attended a vigil on campus. At least 79 people have died and more are missing as a fishing boat carrying migrants capsizes off the coast of southern Greece. Boris Johnson has demanded that an MP who sits on the Parliamentary Privileges Committee should quit over his own lockdown behaviour as the committee prepares to publish its report into the former Prime Minister tomorrow morning. Hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making headlines with the associate editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and the deputy comment editor at the Telegraph, Annabelle Denham. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. And we'll start with the front page of the Metro, which leads with the vigil held for the 2 students killed in Nottingham. Thousands turned up to support the grieving families of Grace O'Malley Kumar and Barnaby Webber. A similar headline for the Daily Express, which describes the mood at the vigil as one of numb and comprehending grief. The Daily Mail focuses on the emotional speeches made by both of the victims' fathers. The Times picks out a quote from Grace's father where he encouraged mourners to look after each other and love everyone. The Guardian reports on a groundbreaking scientific advance where scientists have sidestepped the need for eggs and sperm by creating a synthetic embryo using stem cells. The Daily Telegraph reports on Boris Johnson calling for Sir Bernard Jenkins to be removed from the Privileges Committee over his alleged lockdown rule-breaking. That's an image from Silvio Berlusconi's funeral on the front of the Financial Times, which also says there's pressure on the Prime Minister over increasing mortgage rates. And mortgages on the front of the Eye too, which says the Tories risk losing the support of homeowners. And there's an AI warning from Elon Musk on the front of the Daily Star. And a reminder, by scanning the QR codes you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch along with us. All right, well, tonight we're joined by Kevin Maguire and Annabelle Denham. There they are in the big screen. Good evening to you both, Kevin, Annabelle. Great to have you with us. And we'll start with the front page of the Metro, Kevin. And as we said, a number of papers tomorrow covering that vigil in Nottingham and these families' grief. There for everyone to see.
No, absolutely incredibly moving scenes. The Metro have gone for the headline "United in Love." That's the love of their children, 2 grieving families, and the father spoke so movingly, as did others. And it's almost impossible. The only people who will really know how they feel are those who've suffered something similar, because it's beyond the comprehension of most of us to lose a child in such a violent, horrific way. But it's how do those families cope? How does the students' friends, family, and also the friends and family of Ian, 65, the school caretaker who was also murdered in his van taken. How do they cope? And that's the big question. But people are incredibly resilient. But listening to the fathers speak, Barnaby say doesn't know how he'll deal with it, and Grace's dad pictured there saying, look after each other. It's just kind of really shocking that it happened. But it's now how do we as people respond and deal with it.
Yeah, let's look at the front of the Mail if we can now, Annabelle, as we talk about those 2 fathers who just showed incredible strength to be able to talk just a day after losing their children. As Kevin said, it was so emotional, so touching, and really painful to kind of hear the raw emotion that these guys are going through.
Absolutely, it's just awful. And I think everyone's thoughts are with those grief-stricken families. Like Kevin says, it's simply beyond every parent's worst nightmare. It's impossible to imagine. And I think that this trauma will be felt so widely. Thousands of students attending that vigil. And like you say, I think so staggered really at the courage and composure of those two fathers so soon after this very violent attack. And I think, I was really struck by how this was happening to kids at university. This is often the first time that people are away from their families, and indeed the first time that parents are sending their children away. And this is simply the absolute last thing that you would expect to have happen. And now, as time passes, I think people are going to want explanations. They're going to want answers. We cannot understand, we cannot fathom why this happened. We're only beginning to learn details about the murder suspect. And, I think we simply want to know what it was that led to this absolutely heinous act.
And Kevin, do you think there are going to be those questions to be asked about the person who was responsible? Of course, there is someone in custody at the moment arrested on suspicion of murder. To try and find out exactly what's transpired that meant that a person like this was able to carry out this kind of act.
Yeah, there has to be a person in custody. The police say they're not looking for anybody else, and you've got to understand. We've got to understand why whoever did this. I know there is a legal process here. Why whoever did this did it, and where there are opportunities to stop them doing it, that was somehow missed. I don't intend to, or mean to blame anybody on that, but maybe lessons can be learned, because it is just absolutely appalling how somebody could murder 3 people, 2 students, a man 65 still working. Use his van to run over 3 other people, one of whom is critically injured. It's just terrible. It is beyond the comprehension of most of us. We have to get our heads around it, understand why it happened, and how it might, I say might have been prevented. All those questions have to be asked.
Yeah, they do. Perhaps lessons to be learned. A number of families shattered by what happened in Nottingham yesterday. Right, let's move on to some of the politics that are on the front pages now. And Annabelle, let's start off with you. The front page of the Eye here. There's the headline: Tories losing support from home owners as Hunt backs new rate hike. Talk us through the reporting here.
Sure. So this is new polling for the Eye. It's suggesting that homeowners are turning away from the Conservatives. I don't think that this is altogether surprising. Let's not forget that when Rishi Sunak came into number 10, the impression that he gave was one of quiet competence, that he and Jeremy Hunt would be very safe hands on the tiller. And now it looks very much like they have lost control of the economy. What we are seeing is banks freezing off some of their offers, perhaps raising mortgage rates in response to the expectation that there will be interest rate increases. And why are those expectations changing? Well, it's off the back of this very sticky inflation that we've seen, despite Rishi Sunak pledging that inflation would be halved by the end of the year. It is remaining stubbornly high. And earlier this week, we had ONS labour market data that found that wage growth has gone up by 7%. Now, this is still a reduction in real terms, but is nonetheless an absolutely massive number. And it renews fears that we now find ourselves in some kind of wage price spiral where prices on the shelves are going up. So people are then going to be demanding pay raises in order to fund it, which in turn is going to lead to companies needing to increase their prices in order to meet those pay demands. And you can see how you get into that spiral, which Jeremy Hunt, which Rishi Sunak, which Andrew Bailey are all absolutely terrified of. And, you know, as the Eye is pointing out, this is simply something that the Tories cannot ignore. They are going to pay for this at the next general election unless they can find a way to grow the economy, to cut taxes, you know, and to bring down inflation. It's not exactly within Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak's gift. It's very much the responsibility of the Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England, but nonetheless it looks like the most senior members of our government are throwing their weight behind the decisions that the MPC will be making.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that wage price spiral, Kevin, because that is what has always been feared and what's been talked about. But Kevin, as you know, and I saw you shaking your head at some of that, there is another way of doing this. And if we look at what's happened in the States right now, they've paused the rate rises. They've managed to get inflation under control. So there are other factors, and the comparisons don't often work. I mean, Annabelle said, you know, that was a promise by Rishi Sunak to bring inflation down. It's remaining sticky, it's maybe going up, and rates are rising as well.
No, absolutely. And next week, expected to go up again with Jeremy Hunt backing it. And the FT, rather similarly to the Eye, are pointing out Sunak's going to feel the heat on this because they are rapid mortgage rises, dominated Prime Minister's questions. Keir Starmer basically saying, you know, Sunak's been distracted, all this nonsense with Johnson and Honours. But the HSBC's put up cost of borrowing twice a week. It's worth remembering that in December 2021, as recently as then, interest rates were 0.1%, the base rate. It's now 4.5%. It is going to go higher. That's an extraordinary rise. And it's quite right that inflation eats into the value of your wages. Wages are chasing inflation. Inflation is not, wages aren't creating the inflation. It's wages are chasing inflation. But it damages your living standards, high inflation, but so do higher mortgage interest rates as they take your spending power away. So it's kind of people are under assault from two directions when you've got inflation, what you buy is going up in price, and then your mortgages, your car loans, your credit cards, they're going up too.
And Annabelle, you kind of touched on it a little bit in your answer there. There's sort of the criticism coming from some of the Conservative Party towards the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee. But, I mean, my thought on this is, as rates keep going up, are we going to start seeing other parts of the political divide perhaps questioning the way that the Bank of England have been raising rates? There was a question that perhaps they should have got a hold of this earlier and didn't act quickly enough, and those criticisms sort of are lingering, aren't they now?
Yes, in fact, I think the government was quite slow to criticise the Bank of England for having extremely loose monetary policy for far too long. And, you know, the Bank of England has had a bit of a communications disaster ever since it allowed this massive increase in the broad supply of money during the coronavirus pandemic. Andrew Bailey has been very quick to blame workers, or particularly older workers who've decided to retire. He's criticised those who've asked for pay rises, which I think is frankly immoral. People should go to their employer and try and get the best pay that they possibly can. He criticised some companies for their pricing structures. And I think it's really time that the Bank of England took responsibility. It was in a very difficult position during the pandemic. It was under immense pressure to print money so that the government could fund support packages such as the £70 billion furlough scheme. But that doesn't explain why it was so slow to wake up to the inflationary threat and to suggest for a really long time that it was transitory. I think we all know now, here we are in June 2023, that inflation is not transitory. It's very damaging for the Bank of England. What it needs more than anything else is to restore credibility. Only then will expectations of interest rates rises come down, once people have realised or at least expect that the Bank of England will get inflation under control. But until that point, you know, we are going to see banks making these sorts of moves, increasing mortgage rates, perhaps pulling deals off the market. And for Rishi Sunak, like the front of the Financial Times says, this is extremely awkward. Let's not forget that it was fears about a mortgage time bomb that contributed to the ousting of Liz Truss. And now the cost of government borrowing is higher than it was after Truss's mini budget. So the question will be, does Rishi Sunak face similar risks? I think it's unlikely, but until undoubtedly he is in a very uncomfortable position indeed.
And Kevin, a quick thought from you on where the Labour Party will position themselves on this. That I haven't yet heard sort of criticism of the Bank of England coming from people in the shadow Treasury in the Labour Party. But where will they position themselves, considering the fact that, you know, in 18 months' time they actually could be in power?
Yeah, politically it suits Labour to attack the UK Conservative government, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, as well as Liz Truss, but they want to pin it on the current politicians. That's why I think they're not having a go at the Bank of England. But there's no doubt the Bank of England has been slow. There's a big splurge of inflation after energy prices went through the roof, as did food prices after the Putin invasion of Ukraine. You can't blame the UK Conservative government for that, but you can complain or critique its handling of the crisis. But no, it suits Labour to go for the politicians rather than the bank.
OK. Kevin, Annabelle, appreciate that. Good talk. More from you guys later. Now, still to come, we'll discuss more of the stories making tomorrow's papers, including this one on the front of the FT about the former leader of Italy, Silvio Berlusconi, and his state funeral that was held today.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, you know, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
They're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Hello there and welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me is the associate editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and the deputy comment editor, The Telegraph, Annabelle Denham. And there they are. Guys, let's crack straight on because I want to get to this story that's on the front of The Guardian. I'm sure it's in some of the other papers as well. Annabelle, desperate Johnson hits out at Tory MPs, laid into Sir Bernard Jenkins. Why?
Yes, so he is calling for the Brexit supporting Conservative grandee Sir Bernard Jenkins to resign. This is following him allegedly attending an event to mark his wife's 65th birthday, at which there were drinks and, yes, cake in December 2022 when indoor socialising was banned in London. Sir Bernard Jenkins has denied attending a drinks party. An ally has said that no rules were broken. This feels like Boris Johnson is slightly clutching at straws. I'm not sure that there's been that much widespread sympathy for the idea that this was a kangaroo court, even if it did at times feel as though it was rigged against him. The fundamental fact remains that Boris Johnson has resigned with immediate effect. Very few sanctions will be able to be imposed on him once the Privileges Committee report has been published, which is obviously expected tomorrow. I think this just represents yet more blue on blue attacks, more mud slinging, which has been going on for years now. It's been going on since the end of 2021, if not before. It became particularly bitter during the Conservative leadership contest last summer. And frankly, I think the public are tired of it. And what will be really telling is whether Conservative MPs are tired of it as well, because there will be a debate on Monday on whether to accept the report's findings. Downing Street has decided not to whip the vote, and Tory MPs are going to be free to cast ballots against Boris Johnson after. And let's see what they decide. Are they now just desperate to draw a line under the whole saga?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kevin, is it just blue on blue? Because what's happening here is that Boris Johnson is once again attempting to undermine the integrity of this committee, which feels more than just mudslinging to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, he was toppled as Prime Minister. He's chucked his toys out the pram and quit as an MP, probably jumped before he was pushed by this committee, and he will. He'll go to his grave doing a baby Trump with a temper tantrum, saying it's all against me. The blob, the committee has got it in for me, which of course is nonsense when they've just looked at the evidence. There's 7 of them. I understand the report was agreed unanimously. It's a Tory majority. 4, you take off Bernard Jenkins and it wouldn't make any difference anyway. But what he doesn't grasp, Johnson, is the committee isn't fined him in contempt of Parliament and lying and recklessly misleading the House of Commons because he went to a party. It's because he denied he went to a party and lied that he went to a party and he broke the rules. That's what it's all about. So the comparison with Bernard Jenkins doesn't wash anyway, despite the fact Bernard Jenkins is denying anything. It is because Johnson denied and lied to MPs in the House of Commons. That's why he is in such deep trouble. And he still can't get it into his head. I think he's always created his own reality, his own false reality, his fantasy. I suppose it's what some of Trump's supporters would call alternative facts. That's what he's always grasping for, and the truth just gets lost.
OK. Final thought, Annabelle, to you. Different story, not related in the slightest. Silvio Berlusconi on the front of the Financial Times being laid to rest, and quite a turnout in Milan.
Yes, that's right. And it does seem that he divided opinion in life and he has divided opinion in death. It seemed like a very fitting funeral for Silvio Berlusconi. It was attended by his lovers and an ex-wife, his girlfriend, 53 years his junior. And I rather like the quote from the Archbishop of Milan, who said during his homily that Silvio Berlusconi was certainly a figure who acquired notoriety. What a diplomatic statement that was. But, you know, obviously Berlusconi, he was a towering presence in Italian life for 3 decades, one of the most recognisable and notorious figures on the international stage.
OK, Annabelle, Kevin, appreciate that both. Thank you very much for your time this evening. All right, let's take a look at what the weather has in store for the next couple of days.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the fine sunny weather continues until the end of the week, but the weekend's going to bring a change as heavy rain spreads in from the Atlantic. Tomorrow morning, early mist and low cloud will clear to leave another fine day with sunny spells. It's going to become warm inland with temperatures in the mid to late 20s Celsius. Eastern counties are going to be a little cooler. The afternoon will bring a few showers, mostly for Wales and Ireland, where, once again, they may give way to some thundery downpours. Those showers will become more widespread over Western Ireland through the afternoon.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up on Sky News at 11, people in Nottingham gather to remember the victims of yesterday morning's attacks in the city.